So this is another video about a writing project that I like to give. Um, a writing project that I like to give my students. So teachers and students may end up watching this video. I'll try and make it as generic as possible, but I really do have my students in mind as I'm describing this. But let me just talk through what it is. I've mentioned in another video that I'm a big fan of writing about writing. I'm a big fan of writing as a content course. I think and so this project kind of came out of that mentality toward writing when I paired with a learning community that had chemistry in it. So I teach a learning community with chemistry. I've also done it with math. But in this case, we were trying to find a way to get students to think about household chemicals and to think about some of the chemistry that happens all around their house in a safe way, sometimes in a dangerous way. We tried a worst case scenario, but got a lot of really more pseudoscience-y things than anything else. And so now it's just what chemicals are there? What does it matter? Now, I also use this project in my standalone classes, and so that's the version I'm going to talk about now. I might go into a little more depth on the chemistry side, either at the end of the video or in another video, depending on how long I go on unnecessarily. So, suffice to say, My Chemical Adventure is a project that helps students explore how writing and rhetoric shows up in their everyday life. It is kind of motivated by things like the Tide Pod thing that was going on a few years ago, where people were doing really silly things and that were dangerous when they shouldn't have been. But it looks, if whether you're into business or marketing or art and like visual design, whether you're into humanities and kind of ethical use or ethical communication or ethical business practices, whether you're an engineer and you have to eventually one day communicate with technical writers on how this thing that you've engineered should be presented to people who have no idea what you've created and how it should be used. All of these things can be really practical lessons and practical interests in those areas and many more. So I find it to be helpful for that reason. But basically what it is you go and you explore all around your house. And so I have students start out with a picture collage as a step toward the goal of an analysis or an evaluation project, depending on what course level they're at. So I've used this in 101 and 102 with different emphases, and that's okay as long as you get the lessons you're supposed to learn for those courses. But first is discovery with any good scientific process. So I have students do a picture collage, they take a bunch of pictures, what's under the bathroom sink, what's in their cupboard. Sometimes students will take pictures and they'll be intrigued by the marketing, and so they'll take pictures of the little honey bee guy on the front of the Honey Nut Cheerios, and then they'll take a picture of the lemon in the front label of the Lysol spray, and then other students will be really intrigued by some of the chemicals and the ingredients and things like that, so they'll take a picture of the nutrition facts, and then some students like to combine all of it and take all of those. And sometimes it's interesting to look at how the products or chemicals are nested together, so if we are so you might look at, for instance, in my bathroom, I've got hydrocortisone cream and I've got Crest toothpaste or a certain type of toothpaste, and their labels are the exact same colors and they're the same type of tube, but one is smaller. And so we could talk about, well, so what are the interesting things about the fact that those live in the same place? It became an interesting phenomenon the first time I asked one of my daughters to get the hydrocortisone cream when they were too young to read the label, but they knew what it was supposed to look like. They had got a mosquito bite or whatever it was, and they brought me the wrong cream, and I was like, that's interesting. I think there was another time I went to brush my teeth in the middle of the night and felt for the wrong tube. So it was kind of funny and also potentially dangerous. So these are the kind of things that could come up. But the first step is discovery. What chemicals are there? What does it mean that they're there? And so we explore how language, writing, and rhetoric happens in our everyday lives in this chemical journey or chemical adventure that is that doesn't take us far from home. And so it's more like an Alice down the rabbit hole kind of thing. She never left her backyard, right? Supposedly. So with that, students gather data and document what kind of chemicals or products are present in their own home. They just what is there starts in the picture collage phase. Sometimes I'll have a middle step where they actually fill out a a database entry for multiple products, talking about different font styles, different visual design elements. And when it's paired with chemistry, I'll even have them include things from links to material safety data sheets, and the chemical equation or chemical nomenclature for some of the ingredients that show up on some of the products. And so we'll drill down into that, and then that gives them a little slightly different angle to analyze, so that they're using some of that chemistry knowledge. What can also be interesting is I'll sometimes in that database thing, I'll have students go and look up Yelp reviews and link to them so that they have that accessible. And so those are some of the starting places for this project, because it's about figuring out how writing happens in everyday life, and so it's not so much about the product as it is how the product communicates to the consumer, to you, to the individual, and so what does that look like? So they do that first step. They create a picture collage, and then when they're so this will be getting a bunch of pictures, creating a map of their home of sorts, and I've had a variety of fun ways that these picture collages have been organized. People will include labels of the areas, or put danger call outs and things like that, or group them by specific marketing choices. So it can really be a way where each student, each writer can find their own way into this project, which is what I really like. They find the thing that intrigues them most and they start building the project that way. It's a great early draft process because you're gathering information, and it's the basics. What is there? Sometimes when we're dealing with complex, kind of messy things, it can be really hard to start, and the easiest way to start is to take a bunch of pictures and start putting them together in an organized way. I even used that technique when I was working on my dissertation. I had read 800 or 900 different articles and book chapters, so I listed them all out. I printed them all in little cards, and then I started organizing them into categories to figure out, okay, what is it that I actually know about? What is it that I want to talk about? What are the key topics, and how do they fit together? And that became a really nice way to start the process of this much larger, much more complex project. So now that was the picture collage. Let me jump into the actual essay requirements, and see what we get when we get there. It's going to change a little bit for each course based on whether it's a 101 or 102, or based on whether it is which part of the course I'm using it in. Sometimes it's the first project, sometimes it's the second or third, and so depending on what I'm trying to do, I might change some of the requirements or the length or the number of academic sources based on what I know students have been through. So students often have already begun thinking about and documenting what kind of products are there, and so their paper ends up focusing, they find some sort of pattern in the marketing or some sort of ethical thing they want to zoom in on that ties to visual design, and so they will hopefully stretch and reimagine how they deal with everyday products, and also think about some of the technical writing, visual design, aesthetics. So you can do this from a variety of different angles. But what they end up writing about is they start trying to answer questions about what are the rhetorical and chemical combinations that are actually really effective, what are most ineffective, what are dangerous, what are harmless, and why, and then what should we do about it is kind of if you get pushed into that evaluative stage. And so this is, it can be a really fun project because it's got a lot of ways to scaffold up. If someone's just supposed to be describing, so in a WAC 101 course, I might just have, or some sort of this writing across the curriculum, or some sort of developmental writing course, I may have students just begin describing what they see and start trying to put things together with a little bit of analysis, just as a warm-up into this new area of writing. In a 101, I might push that analytical side, and in a 102, I'm probably going to ask for a thesis-driven argument that not only analyzes but also evaluates and makes some sort of firm claim that's supported by secondary research about what we should do in light of what we find in marketing, or in light of what we find based on warning labels, in light of what we find based on the ingredients or their possible combinations in the house, that sort of thing, or in the home where they're stored. And so So that is the Chemical Adventure Project, or some of the bits and pieces of it. Again, there's a lot of ways that you can go about this. There is a danger sometimes, especially when I pair it with a chemistry class, because it can become all about the chemicals if it's tied to my chemistry class partner. But there's a lot even in standalone where you can do research just on the marketing, do research just on visual design, do research on ethical or legal implications of how things get communicated on labels, do research on how we deliver knowledge or how we take in knowledge. Tide Pods can be really dangerous if left out for kids. Yeah. Well, even as an adult, I had a friend who I went over to the house multiple times for a big group gathering, and they had their detergent pods all up on this nice little candy dish or cookie dish. And so I remember walking in and going, "Oh, that looks good," because we didn't use Tide Pods. Wasn't really familiar. And then as I went to reach, I'm like, I'm not supposed to eat that. So maybe that's more to tell you about myself than anyone else. But these are the different implications that we can research. We can try and decide whether we're going to document sources from the labels, from online safety data sheets, which is a national requirement for all things that use any sort of chemicals, harmless or harmful. And so, especially the core products. So this project can be really versatile depending on what your background is or what your future goals are. So some of these things I remember thinking about before college with safety data sheets when I worked at a block yard and we had hydrochloric acid or cement or silica sand, and we had to know how these things worked. We had to be able to read the labels, understand the dangers, understand how to deal with a spill, that kind of stuff. And so now, even as I learn more about the products around my own house, I look at cereal labels and realize, oh, this cereal has absolutely no nutrients in it and is only 10% of the daily value despite having 400 calories in a serving, whereas this cereal gives me almost a full multivitamin worth of nutrients and for the same amount of calories. And it's no wonder when I eat one, I end up feeling low energy in half the time as the other. So it's kind of cool. These are all the possible implications of this project. Hopefully it helps you, whether you're a student or a teacher, either understand what you're doing in my class or give you ideas of what to do in your own class. Thanks, and enjoy whatever part of the day it is in your part of the world.